Why do we sometimes feel like nothing fulfills us anymore, like everything has lost its flavor, like the entire world has become a soulless echo? What happens when the things that once excited us no longer spark anything, when even what used to make us laugh now feels hollow, mechanical, as if we're faking joy? It's not just sadness or boredom. It's something deeper, something more existential. It feels like being trapped in an inner winter, where there is no sun, no meaning, no clear direction. Some call it a crisis, others mistake it for depression, but there's an older, more precise, more meaningful name for it: the dark night of the soul. Carl Jung, the great explorer of the human soul, spoke of this phenomenon as an inevitable stage in certain moments of life. A kind of descent, whether voluntary or forced, into the depths of the unconscious, where the ego, that structure we've spent years building, begins to shake, to crumble. And as it collapses, so do our old certainties, our masks, our artificial habits and desires. We no longer know who we are, but we also can't go back to who we were. We're stuck in a kind of no man's land, where the lights have gone out and silence weighs more than any noise. In that darkness, the first thing to fade is joy. Laughter sounds distant. Shows, trips, goals, even the people we love, start to blur before our eyes. It's not that they've lost their value in themselves, it's that something inside us has broken, something has changed. And even though we don't fully understand it, we can sense it. We're not being punished, we're being called. Called to look inward, to stop searching outside for what can only be born deep within our soul. It's not easy to understand this call, even less so to accept it, because the culture we live in tells us we must be okay, we must be productive, happy, motivated, successful. And if we're not, something's wrong with us. So we try to fix ourselves. We force ourselves to keep up the same routine, to laugh where there's no laughter left, to chase new stimuli, new challenges, new distractions. But nothing works. The discomfort lingers. The anguish settles in. The emptiness becomes a silent companion, a shadow that walks beside us and whispers that all the things we thought were important no longer are. That maybe they never were. Jung understood that shadow well. He knew the soul doesn't tolerate self-deception for long. Sooner or later, life confronts us with what we've avoided seeing: our unhealed wounds, our contradictions, our childhood pain disguised as functional adulthood. In the dark night, everything we've repressed begins to rise, not to destroy us, but to show us who we really are. But for that to happen, we must first allow the old to die. That's the hardest part, because even if the old no longer works, it's still familiar. We know it. It's given us an identity. Even if it's full of frustration and lies, it provides a structure. And what's scarier than losing that structure without yet having a new one? That's why the emptiness hurts. That's why we feel like nothing makes sense. Because we're between two worlds, the one that no longer belongs to us, and the one that has yet to be revealed. In that uncertain threshold, the soul asks something from us that is rarely taught: patience with not knowing, courage to be alone with our silence, humility to not understand anything for a while and still keep going. It's not a surrender, it's a transformation. And like all metamorphoses, it requires darkness, retreat, a certain withdrawal from the world. Not to abandon it, but to be reborn into it in a new way. Curiously, this process often begins when everything seems to be going well. Sometimes we have success, a partner, health, stability. And yet, something inside begins to fall apart. Because the soul doesn't follow external logic. It doesn't care about what we should be, about appearances or social norms. It seeks truth. And when we've been betraying it for too long, it reveals itself through that crushing emptiness that robs us of the will to keep pretending. This is where many people get scared. And it's understandable. We've been taught to fear sadness, to avoid pain, to numb the soul with work, with entertainment, with consumption. But Jung insisted we should not fear this darkness. On the contrary, we should honor it, because it's a sign that something inside us is trying to be born. Something more honest, deeper, more connected to who we truly are. This descent into the unconscious is not a regression, but a journey forward. A necessary step in the process Jung called individuation, the path toward becoming whole, not perfect. People who have integrated their shadow, embraced their pain, and understood that authentic joy is not shallow euphoria, but a deep calm that arises from self-knowledge. But to get there, we must go through it. And along the way, the world loses its color. The days grow heavy, pleasures lose their taste, and the only compass we have is our own silence. It's not a comfortable silence. It's a silence that burns, that unsettles, that confronts. But it's also the only place where we can hear the voice that has always been there, patiently waiting for us to stop being distracted. The good news, if there is such a thing, is that this night is not eternal. It lasts only as long as it needs to, long enough for the old self to dissolve and for the new one to have space to emerge. And when we finally come out of it, we are no longer the same. We haven't found all the answers, but we've learned to live without them. We don't know everything, but now it's enough to know who we are. And that changes everything. So if today you feel like nothing brings you joy, that life has lost its flavor, that you're more tired in your soul than in your body, maybe you're not lost. Maybe you're waking up. Maybe you're crossing that silent threshold that separates the surface from the depths. And though it may seem like everything is falling apart, perhaps you're actually being rebuilt from within. Because sometimes, the soul needs to empty everything in order to finally be filled with truth. Many try to escape this inner darkness through quick fixes. They throw themselves into new projects, into improvised relationships, into therapies that promise instant relief. Some pack their schedules with tasks just to avoid listening to themselves, as if constant motion could erase the abyss. But the soul cannot be fooled. Even if you cover it with smiles, it still feels. Even if you drown it in busyness, it waits. Not to punish you, but because it knows that only in deep encounter with yourself can true transformation begin. This is where the Real Challenge begins. It's not about finding answers, but about resisting the urge to run away, to stay, to dwell in the silence, to face the pain without trying to annihilate it. And how do you do that without going mad? How do you survive the emptiness without giving up? The key isn't in fighting the darkness, but in learning to walk with it. Not as an enemy, but as a guide. Because there's wisdom in that twilight, a voice that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, but gently and firmly insists that you stop searching outside for what can only emerge from deep within you. That voice doesn't speak with words, but with intuitions, with dreams, with small tremors of the soul that are barely perceptible. At first, it's almost impossible to hear it, because all the noise in our minds gets in the way. We're used to explaining everything, solving everything, analyzing even what we feel. But this stage can't be solved with logic. It's a territory that can't be thought, only felt. And in that feeling, time stretches and waiting becomes part of the process. We slowly learn to be present even when we don't understand what any of it means. As we move forward, without even fully noticing it, something starts to change. Not in the outer world, but in how we see it. Where we once saw a boring routine, we now see a chance for depth. Where everything once seemed flat, a subtle texture begins to appear. Transformation doesn't happen all at once. It's like a seed underground, you can't see it, but it's growing. The dark night acts like that fertile, silent soil where new life takes shape. And even when it seems like nothing is happening, something essential is shifting within. Many never make it this far. Not because they can't, but because they were never taught to trust their inner process. They were taught to fear the void, to constantly seek external validation, to fill silence with words, and the soul doesn't bloom in noise. It blooms in surrender. Not a surrender of defeat, but a conscious yielding to what is. A radical acceptance of the present moment, just as it is. Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it doesn't make sense. At this stage, tears come easily. Sometimes for no apparent reason. You're walking down the street, you hear a song, you watch a sunset, and something breaks open. It's not just sadness. It's an ancient melancholy, as if the soul remembers something we had forgotten. Maybe the longing to live with authenticity. Maybe the pain of having been disconnected from ourselves for so long. But within those tears, there's also beauty. Because they show that something has softened. That the wall is beginning to give way. That the soul at last is breathing. And then, almost without knowing how, we begin to notice small sparks. A book that touches us deeply. An honest conversation. A shared silence. We no longer crave wild euphoria. What's true is enough, even if it's simple. Because we understand that joy isn't something you force. It's something that arises when you stop trying so hard to feel it. And that joy, though quieter, is far more powerful than any fleeting thrill. It's a joy born of having met, even just a little bit, the most intimate core of yourself. Jung said there is no awakening of consciousness without pain, that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But those who dare to look within, even when everything seems to be falling apart, discover a strength they didn't know they had. Not a strength that pushes, dominates, or conquers, but a strength that holds, that remains, that doesn't need certainty because it has learned to trust the process of life, even when it doesn't fully understand it. That kind of strength emerges when we stop resisting the darkness and begin to engage with it. When we realize that the emptiness is not the enemy, but the prelude to a new way of being. The soul empties us, not to destroy us, but so we can be filled again with truth. And that truth isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it means admitting what we don't want to see, that we've been living disconnected, that we've chased things that don't truly represent us, that we've hidden parts of ourselves out of fear of not being loved. But admitting this is also an act of liberation, because only what is accepted can be transformed. Only when we stop running from our shadow can we begin to integrate it. And then, slowly, that shadow stops frightening us. It becomes a teacher. It shows us where the unhealed pain lives, where we've betrayed ourselves, where we're still asleep. And with that knowledge, gently, patiently, we begin to rebuild. Not from others' expectations, but from a commitment to who we really are. Walking this path doesn't make us enlightened or invulnerable. On the contrary, it makes us more human, more capable of feeling, of listening, of being present. Because having dwelled in our own darkness, we no longer fear the darkness of others. We can hold it without judgment, without trying to fix it, simply by being there. And in that presence, the other person finds a space to rest too. Maybe that's why those who have gone through a dark night have a different kind of gaze. A gaze that doesn't linger on the surface, that recognizes what goes unsaid, that knows behind every smile there's a story, a pain, a struggle. They don't become cynical, but they do become more real, more capable of appreciating the small things, more attuned to the everyday miracle of being alive, even when life is far from perfect. And so, without grand revelations, without fireworks, the soul finds its center again. It doesn't need everything to be resolved in order to be at peace, because it has understood that peace doesn't come from the outside. It comes from having dared to walk through the night without going out, from having surrendered without giving up, from having gotten lost, only to truly find oneself. And when the night finally begins to retreat, it doesn't do so with noise. There's no dramatic dawn or sudden revelation that explains everything. One day, you simply wake up and realize you can breathe a little deeper, that there's an inner space that wasn't there before, that something in you has softened, while another part has quietly grown stronger. The strange thing is, you can't quite remember the exact moment it started to change, because the process has no dates, no schedule, no clear sequence. It's as if life itself, with its immense patience, had been shaping you in silence. What once felt like death now begins to feel like renewal. But it's not a return to the person you were before. It's something else. More authentic, more grounded, more serene. It's as if the fall served to strip away everything you weren't. As if the darkness had brought you back to what truly matters. To that part of you that doesn't depend on applause, success, or even excitement. That part of you that can stand on its own, in silence, with dignity. It's no longer about endlessly chasing something to motivate you, something to distract you, something to make you feel alive. Because now you understand that life doesn't always appear in spectacular ways. Sometimes, it hides in the details. In the kind gesture of a stranger, in the way the sunlight falls through your window, in a fleeting moment of peace you can't explain. You no longer crave the euphoria of what's new. You're discovering the depth of simplicity. The soul, once emptied, becomes more receptive. And in that receptiveness, a different kind of joy emerges. One that doesn't shout, but stays. It's true that something in you has changed forever. You've lost certain illusions, certain childish expectations, certain fantasies about how life should be. But in return, you've gained something infinitely more valuable, intimate contact with your truth. And that truth, even when it hurts, is the only thing capable of holding you when everything else falls away. Because it's yours. Because it rises from within. Because it doesn't rely on anything outside to exist. Sometimes you'll look back and feel dizzy. You won't believe how you made it through that darkness without falling apart. Or maybe you did fall apart. But you discovered that breaking can also be sacred, because only what breaks can show what it holds inside. Only what shatters can let in the light. You learned that being strong isn't the same as enduring everything. Sometimes, being strong means allowing yourself to fall while still trusting that, somehow, the fall is also part of the flight. Not everyone will understand this process. Many will keep believing that sadness is an enemy, that confusion is a flaw, that stillness is a waste of time. But you'll know there's great value in stopping. That sometimes we need to be emptied out in order to begin again. That the soul has its own rhythm and won't be rushed. That there's silent wisdom in moments of apparent darkness. And that those who dare to dwell in them without haste find a depth that words can't explain. Maybe that's why you now feel less anxious. You're no longer running after something you can't name. You've stopped competing with yourself. You've stopped pressuring yourself to feel happy all the time. You allow yourself to simply be, without judgment, without force. You treat yourself with more compassion. And that changes everything. Because when you stop fighting yourself, life begins to flow differently. More honestly, more gently, more truthfully. And with that honesty, you relearn how to be with others. You no longer need to seem perfect. It doesn't hurt as much when people don't understand you. You've stopped living for approval. And that sets you free. Because once you've walked through your own night, you become better at walking alongside the nights of others, without trying to switch off their darkness. You learn to listen with the soul, not just the mind. To see with depth, not with haste. To be present, even when there's nothing to say. In the end, this whole journey teaches you to live with greater humility. You come to understand that you don't know everything. That you never will. That there are mysteries that don't need to be solved, but simply respected. And that too is growth. Because the soul doesn't need certainties, it needs truth. It doesn't need external security, but inner roots. It doesn't need to shine for the world, but to be at peace with itself. You no longer obsess over having a clear purpose, defining everything, or planning every step. You've discovered that purpose isn't always a goal, it's a way of being in the world. Sometimes, it's enough to just be authentic. To be present. To live from connection instead of escape. Because when you live from that place, everything begins to taste different. Deeper. More sacred. And if one day the darkness returns, because it will, it won't scare you as much. Because you'll know it's not here to destroy you. That it's not a punishment or a mistake. It's part of the soul's movement. Part of the journey. Part of the learning. You'll welcome it like an old friend returning with new questions. You'll look it in the eyes and say, "Yes, I remember you. I know who you are. And this time, I won't run." Because now you know that at the heart of that shadow, there's always a seed waiting for the chance to be born. That is the silent gift of the dark night. To teach us how to bloom in the place where we once only saw ruin. To hear within us a voice deeper than fear. To trust, even when the path is not clear. To live, not from the need to feel good all the time, but from the courage to be present with everything we are, light and shadow, emptiness and fullness. And so, step by step, moment by moment, you return home. Not to an external home, but to that inner place where everything makes sense without needing explanation. To that sacred space where the soul, at last, can rest. Where there's no need to pretend, or rush, or prove anything. Where you can simply be. With all you've lived. With all you've lost. With all you've gained. With all that's still left to discover. And it's then, right there, that you understand the darkness was never the end, but the beginning. That the emptiness wasn't absence, but preparation. That the silence wasn't punishment, but language. That the sadness wasn't sickness, but transformation. And that, deep down, everything that seemed to break you was actually what was teaching you how to be born again.